The most important thing that we are here for is, or that I'm here for, is to introduce our panel. We have a fantastic panel today. I'm going to do a very, very brief introduction of their backgrounds. They have a fantastic background, and I'm only going to do the one-liner. First of all, here we have Rich Armour. Rich is the recently retired Chief Information Security Officer of GM. Prior to that, he had exact same role at HP and Dell. So Rich represents in this panel kind of the automotive on one side, but knowing both of the sides, IT and OT. So thanks for being here, Rich. I'm going to be like Jeb. Clap, please. Next, we have Suzanne Spaulding. Suzanne is the former Department of Homeland Security Undersecretary for the National Protection and Programs Directorate. Suzanne Suzanne represents here the view from a government/regulatory / national defense point of view. And that's a fantastic point of view to add to this panel. Thank you, Suzanne, for being here. And last but not least, we have one of my two compadres, Andrea Carcano. Andrea co-founded Nozomi Networks almost 7 years ago. They invited me and gave me the amazing opportunity to join them about 4 years ago. It's been a fantastic ride. And today, Andrea is the Chief Product Officer. He also manages a lot of the technical go-to-market functions from pre-sales to delivery and product, and is also the cultural ambassador to Nozomi. How about that? Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. And then last but not least, we have Nigel Holloway, Newsweek survey author and consultant. Thank you, Nigel, for being here. The person who's going to take over from me and do a much, much better job is Kim Legelis, our Chief Marketing Officer. Kim, can you take it away?
Thank you. I have your back behind you here. So thank you all for coming to be here with us for our second annual dinner. We're going to do a brief fireside chat. The fire would be there, as you noticed, and talk a little bit about important issues in industrial cybersecurity somewhat briefly, because I know everyone's probably a little hungry and thirsty here. And then we're going to also do some recognition of leaders in this space and partners that have helped advance industrial cybersecurity in the year that has just passed. So thank you to the panel that's here. Hopefully you all will think maybe of a few questions for them as well. But the basis for our conversation is actually going to be a survey that has yet to be announced from Newsweek called Weathering the Perfect Storm, about industrial cybersecurity, operational technology, IoT, and cyber-physical security. And so Nigel has been kind enough to join us here. He's the author of that survey. There are a few people in this room and on this panel who actually were participants in that survey. But Nigel, I thought before we dive into the several topics for today, I thought I would give you a chance to just maybe tell us a little bit about the survey that you conducted and the...
Thank you. The survey, what we were trying to do is to extend the knowledge in the market beyond the discussion solely about IT and OT systems, to look at the physical world as well, because what we found in our white space analysis that nobody had actually done a survey of that kind, and so we covered Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America, 415 executives in critical infrastructure sectors as designated by the Department of Homeland Security. And I also conducted interviews, including one with Rich, just to flesh out the qualitative material and more insights into what the figures show in the survey. And the report will be out next month, and we're very excited about it.
Thank you, Nigel, for that. And so some of the topics that we're going to use the survey and some of the data in that survey to sort of facilitate a discussion this evening about a couple of topics. One is the general state of IT and OT convergence, the threat landscape, some of the technical and cultural obstacles in terms of meeting the challenges of industrial cybersecurity. We have an opportunity for a Q&A for those of you in the audience that might have some questions for this distinguished panel, and then some final thoughts on the topic. So with that, I think I'm going to proceed and talk a little bit about, move to talking about convergence. So one of the interesting data points from the Newsweek survey is that 88% of organizations surveyed said that they felt that in their organizations, the progress towards convergence was either fully or partially happening, and I think that's a pretty interesting data point, right, to the people in this room. So I thought that I might start with you, Rich, and put you on the spot from your experiences at General Motors. Do you feel that more than 3/4 of organizations would be in that state of converging their OT, IT, and maybe even physical systems?
Well, I do, and some of the drivers behind that are the incredible cost efficiency of standardizing on interface protocols, and in the industrial control or operational technology space, we have over 100 distinct protocols that are available for providing various aspects of industrial control capability. Monitoring what's going on in the plant and controlling it. Yet the trend towards convergence is driven by the need for improved operational reliability. And an example in some years ago, we had a motor running something, we would have controls to turn it on and off, control its speed perhaps. Today, we monitor vibration, we monitor temperature, we monitor other metrics because we're interested in predicting failure and taking maintenance action in advance of a failure issue coming up and impacting the uptime of a manufacturing plant or a logistics operation. So there are a lot of factors driving us to this increased capability that we get from convergence, and not the least of which is the ability to collect the data and apply some of our very powerful data analytics tools to the data that comes out of the physical control environment, and then leverage that data analytics to improve uptime and reliability and quality.
Thank you for that. Well, I think what's interesting about, again, some of the findings from the survey was responsiveness, visibility, automation, customer experience actually all trumped security as motivators for convergence. And I'm wondering if I might put you on the spot, Suzanne, also, and ask you from your days at DHS and from the work that you do today, what's your perspective on the state of convergence and the motivators behind it?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. The number's a little higher than I might have thought, but we certainly have seen this trend coming for quite some time. And one of the things that I felt so lucky about when I was the Undersecretary at DHS is that organization with that crazy name that tells you nothing, National Protection and Programs Directorate, I'm happy to say after 5 years of effort, it's now been renamed to Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, so small victories in bureaucracy, you take them where you can find them. But I had both physical and cybersecurity. We had responsibility for critical infrastructure, strengthening security and resilience against all hazards. And I can't tell you how hard it was to get the folks who had traditionally worried about physical security and watching the physical space to interact effectively with the folks who were used to dealing with IT networks. And yet that is exactly what we spent years there doing, and I think it's gotten better over time. But it was clear to me that convergence that was happening for all the reasons that are there, for all those drivers, in the private sector and some of our municipally owned owners and operators had to be then reflected. It was inevitable, and it had to be reflected in the way the government was organized and was looking at the problem. I would go out and talk to boards and to CEOs about the importance of taking an enterprise risk approach, risk management approach on an enterprise-wide basis, looking across physical and cyber, and then come back to DHS where we were, struggling to get out of our stovepipes. I think it's critically important that we understand across threat, vulnerability, and consequence this convergence and the implications. And one of the implications that's most important, and we can come back to it, is that it takes the cybersecurity discussion, which almost always focuses on threat and vulnerability, and moves it much more aggressively into where it really needs to be for resilience, which is consequence.
Interesting. Well, we definitely will come back to that. And so I think the last question I would have on the convergence topic would go, I'd like to direct to you, Andrea, because I think that you have some strong feelings on having visibility and the convergence of those systems. And as our chief product officer and frankly visionary for our company, not only are you in the field with operators every day, but you have some strong feelings about that. I'm wondering if you might want to share some of those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let me say, first of all, I think I lived part of that because I founded a company 7 years ago. But before founding the company, I worked, as many of you already know, I worked for 3 years in a SOC of an oil and gas company. And before that, I invested my entire PhD, looking at that problem in specific. So, and I remember when I founded the company at the beginning, so I was trying to say, hey, we have an innovative solution for providing you visibility about IoT. And the answer was, we don't need it. Our network is air-gapped. There is no connection between OT and IT. So we don't need any type of visibility. We are already secure, right? And the beautiful things is that we move from a situation like that to a situation where many organizations realized that there was a problem on the cybersecurity side. And the network, even if they thought that it was completely air-gapped, in some cases was true, in some other was partially true. There was a connection in some way. There was a special business case where there was a connection between the two worlds. But now we are in a place that, the convergence is happening. So mainly driven by business perspective, by cybersecurity side, but it is happening and is there. But what I really believe and what we really believe as a company is that we have an opportunity here because I believe if I look at cybersecurity in 5 years from now, that the majority of the standard use case that you can see in cybersecurity, they will become a commodity. You will have a partner managing the standard cybersecurity case of a new malware, of a new packet attacking using a specific vulnerability. The value that we can really provide, in specific as Nozomi, is to come out with a solution that is able to bring a unique visibility and putting together different aspects of a network. So in the organization where I worked before, there was physical cybersecurity, taking care about cameras, badge control, and so on. Then there was an IT taking care about data center and other more traditional aspect. And then there was the OT taking care about the plant, pipeline, and so on. But if you look at the incident in a complex way, and if you try to think about putting together all these different aspects, is really the point where you can bring an added value. Imagine an attack where you can see a new badge access, a camera went offline, and then you can see someone injecting a USB key. So these are all actions that maybe from an internal threat are happening before you can really see something in the network. So that's why if you look at 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you can really bring an added value if you start to look at everything's together and connected. And that's what we're trying to achieve with Nozomi.
Wow, so a little bit of passion there, right? That's the engine that drives us, that and some customer obsession, but we'll get to, that's a different topic. So I think you did touch a little bit, Andrea, on threats, right? Talking about looking at integrated threats. And some of the statistics that were revealed in the survey talked about incursions, one organization saying they had at least, every organization saying, right, Nigel, they had at least one incursion in a given year. And that, interestingly to me, was this mix of 50% of those were from external actors and 50% were from internal actors. And I'm sure we could have an entire evening talking about the nature of the threat and the mix between what someone said to me, the carbon-based units and on the inside and the carbon-based units on the outside. But I thought that maybe, Suzanne, from your perspective and the sources that you might have access to by virtue of your past role, whether you might, in general, comment on the nature of the threat as you see it today. I know at Gartner, several months ago, you talked about certain nation-state actors and the trajectory of their growth. But I'm wondering, in general, if you might want to comment on your perspective on the nature of at least the external threat today.
Yeah, sure. I think this is pretty accurate in terms of what most companies are dealing with on a daily basis is going to be criminal actors, insider threats, and not nation-state actors so much. But we all are aware that whether your particular company industry may be on a target list for a nation-state actor, that you can be affected. We only have to go back to NotPetya and WannaCry to understand. NotPetya, of course, was initially thought to be targeted to Ukraine. DLA Piper, for example, I'm a lawyer by training, a big law firm in the country, all across the country and internationally, became infected because their tax preparation, their tax preparer became infected, and that then infected the entire network of DLA Piper all over the world. So the nation-state actors are something that we have to take seriously. There's also a increasingly blurred line between state actors and non-state actors, both in terms of we have a state actor who behaves like a non-state actor, right, in North Korea, stealing, whose cyber activity is primarily around stealing money, funds to be able to survive. And we have non-state actors with the sophistication that approaches that of state actors, and often are acting on behalf of state actors. So it's not a clear line. I do think we are in a more dangerous place today. My concern, my fear from a threat perspective with regard to nation-state actors like Russia, Iran, and North Korea is less that they will actually do something to cause serious disruption in critical infrastructure than that they will demonstrate their capability to do so as a way of effectively putting a gun to our head, as a way of saying, of freezing us, deterring us from taking action we might otherwise take that's in our national interest for fear of what an adversary might do to us. And what I always say to CEOs is, you do not want to be the hostage in that situation, that because of your vulnerability, you are preventing the country from doing something that it would otherwise feel was in its national interest to do.
Right. I think that awareness about the threat is probably many of the reasons why we're all in this room, or our clients and customers are also taking action. So I think I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit more towards the barriers towards solving some of the challenges that we face. And I thought, Rich, I might direct that question to you in terms of technical obstacles. So as an acting CISO in one of the world's largest corporations, you obviously had a number of challenges that you faced. Thinking about technology and convergence and trying to better protect the risks, what did you experience as some of the leading barriers to achieving that?
Well, certainly there are technology barriers because of the lack of standardization within the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the most significant barriers that I observed was the cultural differences and clash, if you will, between our operational teams and
Mm-hmm.
our security teams. And the operational teams very much focused on uptime. Which is a deep part of the culture in manufacturing and other industrial control environments because of the incredible investment that is made in these environments, and the fact that they have to produce revenue. They've got to produce product. And the security team taking a little different approach and looking at the risk and trying to overlay that risk on top of the the control environment. So that was a significant barrier to effective implementation of security programs, and one that we took a lot of steps to deal with, but really I don't think completely solved. The skilled IT cybersecurity staff, that certainly is always an issue. Do you have enough talent? There's clearly a shortage of cyber talent across the industry, and we're always looking to acquire, attract, and retain the best talent in the environment, and sometimes there are gaps, especially when you're looking for cyber talent that also has that knowledge of the industrial control environment and can map the security controls and principles of information security into the industrial control environment.
Right. So, Andrea, I think you're a self-described geek. I think I can say that, right? You describe yourself as a geek. You've helped a company build a company that's focused on technology. Obviously, there's barriers that you believe exist and have experienced yourself, obviously, but also see in your daily life. Thoughts on some of the technology obstacles that you've seen and what you think is being done to advance against those obstacles?
Yeah. I think we saw different barrier from the technology perspective in our experience and also in my previous experience. But there was a basic barrier, basically the network. If you want to have visibility, if you want to really try to do cybersecurity in this type of environment, you have to have the network set up for, in this case, for Nozomi in specific, to collect the traffic in the passive way. But let me say the beautiful message that I want to, convey tonight is that, yes, there is barrier. We will have barrier. But I think the beautiful things is that I see many different partners today here in the room and customer. And I think the good approach that now I'm seeing in every single of these organizations is there are buyers, but there is the attitude for say, I'm going to use my partner, I'm going to use Nozomi as a technology, and I will put budget for basically try to solve this buyer and to try to reach better visibility, to try to reach a better understanding about what's happening in the network. So I think that is the part that I feel very positive about, thinking about the future. Because yes, there was buyer, we will find eventually new buyer, but the attitude is positive and is a little bit different from the past, and it's an ecosystem attitude, right? Vendors, customer, and partners.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, so you sort of began to touch on something beyond technology, and so sometimes I think that cultural barriers are sort of the elephant in the room, right? So I wanted to maybe ask you, Nigel, in the interviews that you did, talking to security executives, operators, engineers, I'm going to show some data about cultural obstacles, but do you have anything you'd like to share in terms of what you saw as the primary cultural barriers faced?
The prime cultural barrier that emerged in a number of points in the survey was the difference of view between IT and OT. And one of the interesting things to me is that the industry has been talking about how the two sides of this problem need to collaborate, need to work together. And how much progress have we actually made when we do this fresh survey, and we're still finding that this is a major problem in terms of getting the holistic approach to cyber-physical security that we're talking about. So that's the cultural, I think that to me is the overriding cultural component in the cultural problem that many organizations face.
Interesting. And so I thought on the cultural front, Rich, I would ask you, because I know you've recently authored an article for Dark Reading. I think it was entitled, "Are We Secure Yet?" which might have been a reference to a board conversation. So I thought maybe could you talk a little bit about your experiences with boards and the cultural and barriers that exist at the most senior levels in terms of pursuing this topic?
Sure. I think that title of that article was really based on a question that I had from a board member many years ago, not at GM, I might mention, that was basically, hey, are we secure yet? When are we going to be secure? Are we vulnerable to the same kind of attacks that affected one of our competitors recently? And really getting to the understanding that cyber is about risk management, and it's an ongoing task. It's like the laundry; it's never done, and is a challenge. And one of the observations that we make from the data is that organizations that have actually had a breach, a major breach, have a radical and immediate pivot in their cyber culture. All of a sudden, everybody in the organization, from the board members to the CEO on down to the folks that are doing the line work, understand that if we don't get this right, there's going to be traumatic impact for our company and for our customers and for our shareholders. And they respond accordingly. Companies that have not had that experience often do not exhibit a strong cyber culture. And so one of the messages that I've been trying to push is, hey, start acting like a victim, like you have been the victim of a breach, so you do not become the victim of a breach. And the data shows us that organizations that have experienced a major breach have dramatically less probability of having another one in the near future.
Indeed. Isn't it true that breaches are a part of powerful motivation? And I think, Nigel, that was one of the key findings of your survey, is what motivated change. Unfortunately, being a victim did. Suzanne, I know before we sat here, we were talking a little bit about boards and your interactions with them, and we were having a little bit of discussion about whether it's changed, whether it's improved. She asked me about why I kept using the past tense in terms of talking about cybersecurity awareness. So would you like to talk a little bit about your experiences and opinions?
Sure. I think one of the reasons that boards that have experienced breaches and companies that have experienced breaches are more effective going forward is because it forces them to think about the consequences. And when I would speak to boards, I think one of the biggest problems we have, I wrote a piece recently that we should stop talking about cybersecurity. I think the term cybersecurity is increasingly useless. And it is not illuminating. It confuses and intimidates people instead of illuminating. We use it to cover so many things. And yet we know that they are not the same. The theft of PII is not the same as an attack on an industrial control system. I used to worry about weapons of mass destruction. I used to work at CIA, and I was the legal advisor for the folks who worried about WMD. And we couldn't figure out why we couldn't get traction on this until we finally started talking and realized there's no such thing as a WMD. There's nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and each of them have commonalities, but they are susceptible to different approaches. They are different. And until we start talking about the various aspects in real terms that people understand, we are not going to get folks to do the kinds of things that need to be done, whether it's the American public or boards or CEOs or policymakers, members of Congress. We've got to talk to them about, and I think it starts with consequences. When I go to talk to boards, they are intimidated by cybersecurity. It's overwhelming to them. I say, look, a huge part of this is prioritizing and mitigating the impact on your business. That's what we really care about. It's not what happens in the computer or the network. It is the functions that that network enable. And you are the experts on your business. So start there. Start with thinking about what are the consequences you most worry about. Now, which of those could be caused by cyber? And that's how you prioritize and assess your risk. And then, how can you mitigate? Might be non-technical. It might be putting in a handbrake. It might be having paper ballots. And I think that's an important cultural shift. As I said at the outset, I think we need more of the conversation to be not just about technical threats and vulnerabilities in your system, but about confidentiality, access, integrity of that data, and what does that do for your business or your mission essential function if you're government. And I think that will help us make some real progress.
Right, well, amen to that, right? And we're starting to talk a little bit about the solutions that we should pursue. And so I thought I would, before we turn it over to questions from the audience, that means this is your time to think about what smart question you might want to ask these amazing people. You each have a chance to say, what do you think are the key success factors that this group should consider pursuing? Well, let's use your mic, though.
Yep, thank you. I think it's critical that that you approach this from a risk management perspective. And the first step there is to identify what the risks are. And in the environment, not to segue too much into the technical, but you need to understand what is in your environment. So effective risk asset management is really the foundation to understanding what your technical risks are in the space. And then, of course, going about the really rigorous process of managing those risks, accepting some risks, mitigating others, but first and foremost, understand what your risks look like.
Andrea, advice, predictions, key success factors?
I think you know, as I was saying before, if I want to leave the group with a prediction, is that I think the convergence is happening much faster. And I think, you know, as a prediction, what I think we will see not too far from now will be finally one group trying to look at all the different aspects in an organization from the cybersecurity perspective, and not many different groups focus on different, you know, responsibilities on different aspects. But it will be one unique view, because that's the only way for really try to reduce the risk in our organizations.
Excellent. So wondering if anyone here in this audience has a question that they might like to ask the panel. Yes, I'm going to hand the mic to you. Maybe introduce yourself.
So my name is Paulo Pereira. I'm the CTO for Atos for IoT and data. One of the problems that we have seen with cybersecurity is everybody thinks about a defensive posture. So we're talking about investment is how little can you make to defend yourself, right? So the investments are not in line with the threats, right? One of the areas that we're looking for is how do you attach the growth value of the company to those investments in cybersecurity. I think that's one of the pieces that's missing right now, because people are going to say it's like buying car insurance. You get the minimum possible so you can drive your car, right? So how do you actually make this more of an investment versus just a defensive side?
Great question. I know we were talking about this, Suzanne, earlier, so maybe you want to start, and then we'll see if anyone else wants to contribute.
Well, it is a real challenge, and I think it starts with somehow moving from a compliance culture to a risk management culture, which we've all talked about, because the compliance culture says, you know, we got to make the smallest investment possible so that if something happens and somebody comes and asks, you know, we could say we did these things, right? It has to become, again, this is why I focus on consequences, right? It has to become, it has to be understood how a failure to really look at this as a risk management issue can have an effect on the bottom line of your company. And I think one of the things I would say is probably most of the folks in this room are either CIOs, CISOs, somewhere involved in those kinds of challenges. If you are being asked to solve the cyber risk on your own, that's a big problem. Because what you really need to do is to look at this as a continuity of operations issue, right? And you need your continuity of planning, continuity of business team in there. Again, it's not just going to be an investment in technology, right? It's going to be looking at what are the consequences we worry about and what are all the ways we can mitigate those consequences. And then that's what you take to, whoever it is that's making the resource allocation decisions, is here are the consequences that could happen. We've looked at all the ways that we can mitigate. We've looked at communications and financial and legal and operational, right, ways in which we can mitigate. And here's what's left. Here's this delta.
Well, that's an answer. Other questions for the panel from anyone? No? Great. So I think that I want to, first of all, thank our panelists for their contributions to the conversation. So join me in please giving them a hand.